Hello everybody, it is Monday the 16th of March, and before I start there might be a bit of a background noise in this video. I'm trying to have the laptop sitting in a way that the fan doesn't make too much of a noise, but I don't seem to be able to stop it completely this morning, so sorry about that. Right, I want to talk about, what do I want to talk about? Yes, the physical resurrection that is being talked about in the Gospels, at least three of the Gospels, where Jesus is alive after the crucifixion and he is in a solid body. That is what these Gospels claim. Now, I was triggered into the thought of this. I had this thought before many times. I just want to go through it again, maybe in a bit more, do another circle and see a little bit more of what is actually happening there. So I was triggered into this by Paul Wallis. I was watching a video of Paul Wallis's, and he was talking about the view of eternal life as being birth, life, death, going back into a state of just consciousness and then another rebirth. So that is the wheel that many are talking about, and that constitutes eternal life, and I would agree with that. When we talk about eternal life, we're not talking about just one experience, but a continuation of experiences. That is eternal life. I would agree with that. What is happening in the New Testament is actually kind of set apart from the wheel. There's an occurrence in the wheel. And I think Paul Wallis misunderstood what happened there, because he was talking about, God resurrecting a dead body. So Jesus is talking or walking around in his own dead body, and he's not, because that is not what the text is saying. And we need to be very careful about what the text is actually saying. Yeah? Because the text says he was changed. It doesn't say it was his old body resurrected. It said he was changed. Now, where do I want to start? I really want to start going back to the Old Testament and really think if that to some extent is a historical text. That is to say, there were beings in this world that were not human. Yeah? The gods and the angels. Now, God, Lord, angel, that would only talk about what position they had in their own societal structure. Yeah? Whether they were master or whether they were servant or slave even. So, but they were a different species. Not that far removed from us, because apparently they could breed with us, so they couldn't have been that different. In fact, I think the difference between them and us, one of the main differences, is the way they looked. And even then there were only slight differences. Texts talk about that their hair was a bit different. There seemed to have been something different about their eyes. Maybe the way their skin appeared. I think it appeared more shiny than ours. But I mean, in the end, those are differences like the differences between different races in this world. Yeah, and we would know each other, looking at each other. Yeah, if I here in Northern Ireland see somebody that looks Chinese, I know the difference between me and them by their hair. Their hair is a bit different. Their eyes are a bit different. So I can look at a Chinese person saying, you're coming from a different place, or at least your ancestry is in a different place than mine. So in the same way, I think people could look at the angels and say, well, you're not from around here. Yeah. So there were slight differences, but they were not that different that they couldn't breed with us, because they could, apparently, according to the text, they could. So it must have been very close. We must have been very close. But of course, there was one other major difference between them and us, and that is they lived longer. Their bodies lived a lot longer than ours. I mean, it is said thousands of years, which is not eternal. Yeah, the gods died. The gods absolutely died. But, well, if you think about it, if they lived for a couple of thousand years, by that time you would have had how many human generations? Yeah, maybe 10 up to 20 generations. The same Elohim is still around. I mean, by that time you would get the impression he's immortal, yeah? Which he's not. They're not immortal. But that was a major difference. They lived a lot longer, that's what the texts say. So let's see what actually happened in the tomb. What actually happened with that resurrection. Jesus said, now first of all, again, let me talk about this. And again, get out of the Eastern traditions. This has got nothing to do with becoming one with the all. Yeah? Being expanded awareness into infinite consciousness. Nothing to do with that. We cannot be infinite consciousness. We try if we try. So if Jesus says the Father and I are one, and he's talking about my Father in heaven, and with these words alone, it will show you that it is not talking about the all. First of all, he says my Father, which is male. The all contains both male and female aspects. So again, if he says my Father, a male, that cannot be all. My Father who is in heaven, although that term would be a bit fuzzy about, what exactly that is. But still, you have the opposite to heaven, which is hell. Everything has its opposite. So if you're only talking about one specific place or state of being, it could be a state of being, it is not the only possibility, therefore it is not all. So my Father in heaven does not speak about something that is all, but something specific in a specific place. The all is all places. Yeah? So no, we are not talking about he was in universal expanded, God knows what, consciousness. He was connected to one other consciousness, another being or beings. So get out of bloody Eastern traditions. That is not what we're talking about. We're talking about something very specific. Right. So my Father and I are one. I say nothing unless I'm being told to say so. I deny myself. I do not go by my own knowing. I do not judge according to myself. The judge is God in my Father in heaven. He tells me what to do. And that is the way, it's the way of the cross, the way of denial of self into that kingdom. And it is actually creating inside of you another state of consciousness. you're becoming spiritually a different being. Because humanity is not that. We are not a hive mind. Humans are not part of the hive mind. A hive mind, we are individuals. Yeah, so, and again, that is a destruction of the ego, the destruction of individuality, the destruction of self-determination, the destruction of personal willpower, the destruction of all of those things, to be replaced by the will, the thoughts, the judgment of another being that will rule over you. So that is in the spirit. That is what happens spiritually inside of you. And then he goes to the tomb. And here is where Paul Wallis overlooked what the text actually says. Because as I said, Paul Wallis said Jesus came out in his own dead body, and he did not. In fact, it clearly says that his disciples, those that knew him, did not recognize him at first. Now again, if you're totally in the material, yeah, if you're not a spiritual person, if you don't believe on the power of the spirit to change the material, if you don't believe that, then, well, the only explanation you have for this is somebody removed the body and then somebody else came in and pretended to be Jesus. That is the material explanation for that. But the spiritual explanation for that would be that he was a changed spirit, a changed consciousness that created a new body. Yeah, again, the material is formed by the spiritual. It's what in smaller parts is happening in energy healing, in spiritual healing. And here we have the full transformation of an entire body, working on the same principle. I have said for the longest time, and I'm saying it again, what came out of that tomb was not human. I, for the longest time, was saying was not spiritually human, did not think like a human, did not feel like a human, did not act like a human. But I'm now at the point where I'm saying was not physically human. Body and spirit being again one. There was an alien spirit, he became an alien spirit, and it changed into an alien body. So, and there would be the transformation or evolution. Evolution, transhuman, going into a different state, both spiritually and bodily. Evolution driven by the spirit, not driven by the environment in this world, which would usually drive evolution, but being driven by the spirit. And I would say this did not come out of nothing. This was planned. There was an entire group there working on this. There were knowledge was gathered, teachings were gathered from around the world, this going through the garden of knowledge, so to speak, and eating of all the trees. Egypt, Persia, as they hear in Britain, they claim he was here with the Druids. India claims he was there. So that is first, the gathering of knowledge. There was financial backing from the likes of Joseph of Arimathea. They had financial backers for this. This was a spiritual experiment, so to speak, and with Jesus as the guinea pig. He was the one elected to go through this. He would sacrifice himself as the guinea pig. Now, did he do that out of his own free will? if you consider what I would consider is that he was groomed for this part since birth, and that is to say, give me the child from birth until 7 years old and I give you the man. And that was, I would say, definitely done to him. He was prepared. Then you would question how much of it was his own free will. But one way or another, he did agree to be the sacrificial lamb, to be the guinea pig. Is this truth? I don't know. I do not know if this is truth. But I think that is what the text is claiming to be truth. That is what the New Testament is talking about. The power of the Spirit. The power of transformation through the power of the Spirit. And here comes, I would say, not from corruptible into incorruptible, because again, the bodies of the gods were not, and the angels were not incorruptible, but they lived for an awful lot longer. Right, now let me get back to the wheel of reincarnation, the idea of eternal life through several experiences. Okay, so whilst in this experience, you've actually changed into something else, into another species. Yeah? Spiritually and bodily. You've changed into another species. Are you then still part of the wheel of life? Of the wheel of the eternal wheel? Especially since I think to be part of the eternal wheel, you have to be consciousness. That means you are and I am, at least to some extent. Whereas the joining of the hive mind means you suppress, you kill your I am. Yeah? So you get 1,000 years of life or something like that. What does the Bible say? We shall be with the Lord for 1,000 years. So you've been given 1,000 years, which by our lifespan now is quite a bit. But at the end of that, is that it? Will you dissolve, so to speak, after the end of that, unable to rejoin the wheel? So again, have you gained 1,000 years and have lost your soul? Because, as they say, the soul is eternal. The soul can be part of the eternal wheel. What if you have no more soul after that? But what if you have lost it in the heavenly hive mind? Again, something we need to consider. We should think about these things. What will happen to our eternal soul if we go the way of the cross? And the last thing I want to talk about, and that is, do you need to do this consciously? Now again, Paul Wallis said, and again he got that's not right what he said. He said, if the wheel of life is natural, is what happens to us naturally, there's nothing we have to do about it, it will happen, and I agree with that. He said to be resurrected in the body, you are dependent on the will of some God, yeah, to do it for you, and that is actually not what happened. God did not do it. Jesus did it to himself. Jesus had to do the works. That was not given. That was worked for. He had to suppress himself. He had to change himself. He had to obey. He had to not judge. He had to suppress his humanity. Yeah? I mean, like things like compassion. yes, a human being can be driven by compassion. That's what he did whenever he did the healings and stuff. He was moved by compassion. He was overcome by compassion. He was, yeah, driven by compassion. Our compassion is moving us to do certain things, and we obey. Naturally, we go being driven by our emotions, let's say it like that. But even in the resurrection of Lazarus, there was already a change. That is to say, he had compassion, he could work on compassion, but only when God said it was the time to do so. Yeah? This does not mean you're no longer a compassionate being, but you are not moved by the compassion, but you use the compassion whenever God commands it. Again, that is a major change from the human way of thinking and the human way of doing things. So in the case of Lazarus, he's been told his friend is dying, and he sits there for 4 days and he lets him die. Yeah, compassion should have told him, if he was actually moved by compassion, the human way, he should have gone there and then when he was told Lazarus was sick. But he wasn't going by his own knowing. He wasn't moved by his own knowing. But he was commanded to stay back, let Lazarus die, and then perform a resurrection, because that would serve God. And that's a different way of doing things. And that is not the human way of doing things. So there the shift is already occurring. Yes, sorry, I think I lost thread. But Jesus did this consciously. He knew what he was doing. He was willing to go all the way to the cross. He had agreed to be the sacrifice, the guinea pig. So he did it consciously. Do you have to do it consciously for it to work? Or is it only a case of cause and effect? If the spiritual cause is there, the effect will happen, whether you've done the spiritual cause consciously or not. It doesn't matter. Because I would think we are, as a species, being driven on the path of the cross. Yeah, we are all being driven in that way, and I can already hear the shifts in what people are saying. I mean, we've been driven on the path of denial of self. You are not human. Well, I'm sorry, I'm proclaiming myself to be human. Yeah? And they're already working this, that if somebody like me says, I am a human being, others will laugh at you and say, oh, you're infinite awareness, you are that stupid that you think you're human. I don't care who's laughing. Yeah, I say I'm human. But there again, the shift is worked through ridicule. We're nearly at the point where you say I'm human, you're being ridiculed. Yeah, the suppression of the ego is everywhere. The idea of being, we are infinite awareness, which is totally false, but it leads you again to a point where you do not care about this existence. Yeah, because, oh, I'm infinite awareness. This does not matter. The death of the ego. I hear people say, and that is actually one of the most scary shifts that I can see, where people say, you know, oh yeah, I heard that on the Inspired channel, I think. Yeah, the love for your children is obviously important, but there is something so much greater. And there is again the thought of, you know, this is less. There's something so much greater that you must strive for. And what does the Bible say? If this God calls you, what is the first thing he does? Is he takes you away from your family. He separates you from the natural bonds that would define a human being. Again, he takes you into the wilderness. He takes you into disintegration. and then he rebuilds you. And I can see that path being worked in the teachings and what is being said by the oh so spiritual that everybody must follow. They are on the path of the cross, of denial of self. Yeah? And we go transhuman. We will become something greater. Are we? Are we becoming something? We're becoming something different. We are becoming something different. That doesn't mean greater. And again, look at New Jerusalem. Look at what they're doing. Is that greater? Should we sacrifice ourselves to become that? And is the Bible speaking truth? Is it possible? Will the change occur? Again, in Thessalonians, I think it's Thessalonians, or Colossians, one of the two, where it says, we'll be taken up, we will be changed in the twinkle of an eye. The change itself may occur like that, but there would have been a lot of hard work before you get to the point where the change occurs. And are you aware that you are doing the works? And are you aware of what it is you're changing into when you're transcending your humanity? Are you doing this consciously? And again, once that change is performed, what will happen to eternal life? Are you gaining 1,000 years and you're losing your soul? You're losing your I am. Are you, 1,000 years of glorious, do whatever you like, God will give to you if you're a good servant? And have you just paid for that with your soul? So, again, I don't know if it is possible. I'm saying that the New Testament claims it is possible. That is what that teaching claims to be the truth. Yeah? Become like God, and you will be resurrected in a new body. Not in your old dead body, but in a new body. In a heavenly body. A body like theirs. First the spirit. First you become like them in the spirit, and then the material will follow. The material change will follow. That is, I think, what the New Testament claims will happen. That is what the New Testament claims is truth. It claims that there were witnesses to that occurrence. Yeah? It did happen, and there were witnesses there that can attest, that can testify that it happened. Can we take that as truth now? The witnesses are no longer around. I don't know. And the last thing is, should we go on that path to find out? Yeah, just because we can, should we? Should we find out if that is truth? That evolution of humanity can be driven by the Spirit. Especially that Spirit. The Spirit of New Jerusalem. Should we actually find out if that is truth, or is that something that we should leave well alone? Because I don't think it is a good outcome. I don't think it's a good outcome. But yeah, I said we need to look very carefully at what the text is actually saying, because it is important. It is extremely important to get the details right. Yeah, as I like before, like Paul Wallis saying Jesus was running around in his own dead body. No, that is not what the text says. The text says he was transformed, he was changed. The text says he became one with his Father in heaven, first spiritually, and then the flesh was changed. That is what it claims. Yeah? Do we believe that? Should we even go there? That is, and can it be done unconsciously? That is the biggest part. Can it be done unconsciously? Can you be driven onto that path without knowing what it is you're doing, and the change will occur, and it was never your intention, but you were sheep-herded down that path? And does your free will actually count in this, or is it just cause and effect? You do it, it will happen, consciously or unconsciously. In which case we absolutely need to wake up to what it is we're doing, to have free will. I mean, it's still a choice, you can go there, but that should be a conscious choice, because it's concerning your soul. So then it must be a conscious choice and an act of self-determination. To have somebody do that to you is as wrong as it gets. Anyway, here folks, I hope this made sense. I know it's a little bit far out, but I really think that is what the text is saying. It's talking about the power of the spirit and the rebirth into a different body. Evolution, driven by spirit. I leave it at that for today. And I talk to you again soon. Bye.